What suggestions do you have for someone who has a chance to train a staff of an entire nonprofit on equity, inclusion, social justice? 550 people. It's a lot of people. I have a lot of facilitation, but don't have the depth, breadth of experience required to facilitate really well on the topic. So if I understand, you believe you've got good facilitation training skills, you just don't have a depth of equity, inclusion, social justice. So what I would suggest for anyone like you is to put yourself together a master's course. Find some books to read. So like I said, this race dialogues, I mentioned the magic of facilitation. I would find some other books about how do you do equity work. I would also get online and see what is available for just readings, chapters, articles. I have a chapter that I'm sure is online on navigating difficult situations when you're training. The book that was Art of Facilitation, Lisa Landreman, Landreman, Lisa Landreman. There are a number of chapters in there about creating a brave space, not a safe space. And so you can pick and choose from that book. All of this is available on Amazon. My book, Turn the Tide, is about navigating difficult situations. It is in a workplace, but you could read that or find the webinar that I did September and October if you want to watch that to get that capacity. To be honest, my course not only teaches people how to teach about diversity, equity, inclusion, it really will get you some of the competencies you need. This book, Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. Everyone listening, I wanted you to go buy it. There's at least a third edition. There's a parallel readings for diversity and social justice that I think at least have 4. This is Maureen Adams, Lee Bell, Diane Goodman, and then Khyati, maybe Kati Yoshi. You can get all these on Amazon. This book not only has a lot of understanding about concepts around diversity. Now they're much more into social justice. So, diversity is, we have a lot of demographics. Equity inclusion is we meet people's needs, create an environment where people can thrive. That involves also social justice, which is you look at the oppression that's built into policies, practices, attitudes, and you shift that. So it's a nonprofit. If you tell me more what they are, what they do. But again, you have to really know where they are on kind of the multicultural organizational development model, or just from 0 to 10, how inclusive are they already? And if they're early on, they're probably only ready for basic foundational work. If they've not done anything before, then you want to do things like that I teach in the course, breadth of differences, using the group identity cards so they can recognize their own group identities and tell some socialization stories, times they mattered in organizations, felt valued, respected, times they felt marginalized in life because of a group identity they had that was marginalized or people thought. Healthcare, so they're related, but they're early on. So the group identity cards, again, I would have you take my course, to be really honest. The group identity cards, it's 30 plus different categories of difference. You could have them, you can make up your own. Just think of all the different categories of difference, have them brainstorm by group membership, who are the people we serve, and by group membership, who are we in our organization, and then take those and then have them do some deeper learning. So not only breadth of differences, what's marginalization, what are microaggressions, what's privilege. So just some of the basic stuff that I teach. And they also may want in-depth. So again, this could be longer term. And you may want to take 30 to 40 that really want to go more in depth. I call it inclusion practitioners, inclusion partners. You can call them diversity partners. But people that for a year, all right, maybe 6 months if they're not committed to that, can work with you, where they not only learn some of the skills of navigating difficult situations in the moment, noticing group dynamics and intervening in microaggressions, so they can get skill practice in some of that in greater depth. You can do it with everybody, but in a day, I show them some of my tools, pairs and others. I have them learn about microaggressions a lot, and then what would you do if? But you could get a smaller group who meet with you regularly. And they get good foundational intervention skills, running meetings with an inclusion lens, but they also get in-depth. So people who are immigrants and have, quote, legal status, what might be some of the dynamics as they come to get healthcare? People who are or assumed to be undocumented, right? Informed champions. I like that title, new title, Informed Champions. I like it, diversity champions. Some people call them diversity advocates. You come up with a name that works within the culture. Racism, in depth for sure. Classism, in depth. So those four I would require. I would also require sexuality and gender identity, and sexism. Because as you know, healthcare is so biased towards, the research has been on cisgender men, probably white, probably middle to upper middle class. So, and I could be wrong about some of this. And so in depth, it could be 3-hour workshops that you get community members in, and or you develop, and or you get these informed champions to go off with you, develop the workshop, and they help co-facilitate it. So they get, 2 people, 3 people maybe have in-depth work on U.S. context of racism. You can do racism for people who are new to the U.S. that we call people of color, that from their home country, they're like, I was just one of millions. Now you're telling me I'm a person of color. So, I mean, there's so many. Religion. So you can almost take every identity card, housing status, working with folks who are homeless compared to folks who have housing, but it's fragile, compared to folks like me who own a home. Well, the bank owns it, but So I could keep going, but I would have foundational work, and then with some informed champions in depth, and you might open it up to everybody, but you're really trying to deepen the capacity of a small group of folk. 10% isn't bad. You can intentionally have them embedded in every unit. So it's not just whoever wants to come, but work with the leaders and say, you can have as many as you want, but at least one from every unit is getting this in depth so they can be a peer colleague, a peer coach. And then after a while, they'll come back with a lot of what do you do ifs. And just like me, I don't know everything. In fact, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. And if you have this group of informed champions, especially if there's a bunch of them, the wisdom in the group, you just use it. And so someone says, what do you do if? And you have them, kind of like I do in my course, I teach you how to do, having people talk about strategies. Right? So have them be peer groups, and you can even have them be core groups. So let's say you have 40 people and you have groups of 6. So that's 6 to 7 in a group. You have 6 groups. And you do activities in that group, so it deepens their capacity to know each other. It's kind of like a whole high five, but a group of 5 or 6, 7. But then one week could be come with your what do you do ifs after they've gotten some skills, and let them figure that out. And any place they still feel stuck, they can use the whole large group. Your role is to deepen their internal capacity so that they're not just training people over and over, but you get this small group of folks. Now, you might decide to do the same thing with leaders. Informed champions and leaders get this in depth. It depends their resources, your time, what your price point is, what your time availability is. You don't have to do it alone. And in fact, given the breadth of differences, given your identities, you may want to have a co-facilitator who has got some different, not only apparent, visible and invisible for could and does land on people with disabilities and or who are good advocates of disability issues. It reinforces having to have sight. So someone coached me to use apparent and non-apparent, and sometimes I do, and just then I forgot. So apparent differences, and then not apparent differences, so that in the room together, you and your partner have privileged and marginalized enough variance so you cover several categories of difference. Can't be all, but at least you've got some. Great question. Let me keep going. Size of group. Healthcare, 25 to 30 is what I would probably recommend. They're going to probably want larger groups, and yet that takes a whole different level of knowledge of diversity, because you have to have a lot of knowledge about what's the history of the oppression of each of the groups? What's the current dynamics of all the groups? What are common microaggressions for each of the marginalized identities? What are common resistance for diversity? Again, I cover all of this in my online course. What's great about the online course is twice a month we come together live like this just for course members. And so someone like you's on it and you make time to come and you're one of 2 or 3 people, then you get a lot of free coaching. Well, you pay for it, but you get a lot of coaching live from me, just like this, except it's really applied to whatever you're doing. You will need to know skills to just facilitate around diversity, which is, they're kind of like Venn diagrams, facilitating stress management, time management, budget skills. That's some, but a lot of that is teaching. Facilitation is, and again, you may have these skills. It's really about engagement and learning how to design workshops that get people over resistance, over fear, and willing to move with fear to get honest and authentic and open to learning. I've taught a number of customer service. I've taught a lot of the basic foundational organizational courses that people teach. And this is a whole different set of skills. The other thing as a facilitator of this work is you have to do a ton of self-work, recognizing your own socialization, your own values, your prejudice, unconsciously how you might be reinforcing privilege dynamics. So there's a lot to it. And so I'd read 2 to 3, 4 books, including Teaching for Diversity, Social Justice. For everyone else listening, in addition to the overall work about how do you think about design and teaching, they also have, 10 to 15 chapters: racism, classism, religious oppression, ableism, gender oppression. They just keep going. So it might be a way, if you read that, you're like, oh, a lot of some history, as well as 16 hours of curriculum. So while the book I recommended about race dialogues is about a race intergroup dialogue, this one does breadth of differences. And so those are resources. I get a couple people as coaches who do this work that are willing to do some bartering with you. Maybe you help them out and they help you out. But I can't underscore enough that just because someone is quote, a good trainer, facilitator, there is so much knowledge and self-work that goes into being a facilitator and skills that are different. So I'm excited for you. And my fear is they're going to want you to come in and teach them and give information, and that goes against every core bone in my body and every cell. This is about helping people develop greater capacity to engage, recognize microaggressions, interrupt them in the workplace, avoid them, minimize them, and give everyone the kind of health care they deserve, regardless of all the stereotypes they were thought about who deserves privilege and who doesn't deserve. And I bet there are going to be a lot of well-intended white folks in the room who think they're farther along than they are. And so collecting up what are some of the difficult situations or triggering moments or microaggressions you've experienced, doing that in some survey, and then you can use that in your workshops. What would you do if? And you can collect them every day. You train them. You can collect what are some more of these microaggressions you've seen. And it could be between patients that are in the emergency room. Again, I don't know how they're doing it. The waiting room. It could be someone is listening to Fox News on their phone and somebody confronts them. So there's all kinds of things that can be happening in healthcare, much less among staff, the hierarchy between doctors, nurses, PAs, other support staff, much less add race to that, class background. So there's so much, you can't do it all, but the more you know of what's possible and you get them sharing examples, generic, make them, make sure nobody knows who they are by the time you use them. That may get people's commitment. You're like, here's some of the things you all said happen when you're working with patients and families, and when people are waiting. So my best thinking, that was fun. I've never thought about that.